Welcome and thank you all for standing by. All participants will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, you can press star 1 to ask a question from the phone lines. I'd also like to inform parties that the call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. And I'll now turn the meeting over to Ms. Janine McFadden. Thank you, ma'am. You may begin.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar is presented to you by the Bureau of Transportation Statistics and the U.S. Census Bureau. The webinar is on the upcoming 2021 Vehicle Inventory and Use Survey, and will provide an overview of the restored VIUS questionnaires, followed by a question and answer session to get your valuable feedback on our survey and help answer any questions that you may have about the upcoming survey. So presenting today will be myself, Janine McFadden. I am the project manager at the Bureau of Transportation Statistics for the VIUS, and my co-host, Ryan Gould, also of the BTS VIUS project team. In addition, we'll have Kelly Holder, the U.S. Census Bureau project manager of the VIUS, and Gratia Tanner, also of the U.S. Census Bureau VIUS project team. So for an overview of today's schedule, we're going to start with a brief history of the VIUS and how we got to today before we walk through our questionnaire in content detail. Then we'll share some highlights of what's next for the VIUS schedule. And then finally, we'll have a 5-minute break to allow time for those who wish to ask questions during the Q&A to get in queue with the operator or place those questions in the chat box. After the Q&A session with our guests, we will adjourn. As a note, you can use the chat at any time to ask questions. Just be sure when sending the question to use the drop-down and choose all panelists when sending your questions. There will also be some notes entered into the chat to give these directions. Kelly and Gratia will be monitoring the chat and available to take your questions throughout the presentation. So no need to wait till the end of the presentation to get your questions answered. In addition, many of these slides will contain a lot of information. So for your convenience, the slides will be shared from today's presentation. We'll be sending those out by email once we conclude. And then in addition, in the coming weeks, we'll also place a transcript of the presentation on our BTS VIUS webpage, as well as a transcript of the Q&A session from the chat box questions that we received. So please check back with our webpage if you're interested in any of those. Okay, so starting with a brief history of the VIUS was initiated as a part of the 1963 Census of Transportation, which was then a part of the Economic Census. It was originally called the TIUS, the Truck Inventory and Use Survey, but the name was changed in 1997 to allow for future expansion to other types of vehicles in the survey. The U.S. Census Bureau conducted the VIUS every 5 years as a part of the Economic Census until it was discontinued in 2002. So flash forward almost 2 full decades since the last VIUS, and that brings us to today. 2 years ago, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics contracted with the U.S. Census Bureau to conduct the new VIUS, the 2021 VIUS. The VIUS is being restored in partnership between the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, the Federal Highway Administration, and the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Census Bureau. A restored VIUS will address the significant gap in our knowledge of the nation's truck fleet. The new VIUS will be conducted in calendar year 2022, but it will collect data on the characteristics and use of vehicles in 2021. That's why we call it the 2021 VIUS. The sampling methods used for the 2021 VIUS are the same as they were in previous surveys. VIUS is a sample of registered truck vehicle identification numbers, or VINs. The survey collects data from the registered owners of trucks, which could be owned by individuals or businesses, and could be used for personal or commercial uses, or a combination of both. Our sample of about 150,000 trucks is divided into 5 groups. These groups include pickups, SUVs, minivans, straight trucks by different weight classes, and truck tractors. As with past years, the VIUS will not include government-owned trucks, ambulances, fire engines, buses, farm tractors, passenger cars, or motorhomes. In the past, the VIUS was conducted entirely on paper questionnaires, so there is a legacy of two forms that you may be familiar with. The 9501 for light trucks, that collects data on pickups, SUVs, minivans, and light vans, and the 9502 for heavy trucks. That collects data on trucks, straight trucks over 10,000 pounds, and truck tractors. One of the innovations of the 2021 VIUS is that it will be conducted primarily by electronic instrument. But we still refer to the VIUS as having two questionnaires because some of the content for the light trucks and heavy trucks differ. We will be pointing this out as we go through the slides. Throughout the remaining slides, we will refer to light trucks and heavy trucks rather than the form numbers. The questions in the VIUS are grouped by physical and operational characteristic topics, as shown here. You can see the differences in topics by truck type. For light trucks, there are 14 topics. For heavy trucks, there are 16 topics. The two additional categories are for-hire and hazardous materials for the heavy trucks. The remaining slides will walk through the survey content in detail by these topics. Many of the questions under these topics are identical for all trucks. As we go through the content in detail, we will note any differences in question wording or response options between light and heavy trucks. Any questions that are specific to just heavy trucks, and we will also highlight any new or substantially revised 2021 VIUS content as we go along. New or revised content will be in blue text on the slide. In addition, you may refer to us having made changes based on feedback from cognitive interviews, which were conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau in early 2020. These interviews were with potential VIUS respondents, people with registered trucks, that were used to, A, understand the thought process used to answer survey items, and B, to use this knowledge to find better ways of constructing, formulating, and asking the survey questions. Other changes in the 2021 VIUS forms have resulted from years of input from working group, stakeholder, data user, government, and non-government input. We recognize the importance of the VIUS, and like so many of you, are excited to have the VIUS back. I will now hand it off to Ryan to begin presenting the questionnaires.
All right, thank you, Janine. So the VIUS starts by asking all respondents if the vehicle in question is still in their possession. We provide the respondent with the vehicle identification number, the VIN, the make, model, and year to ensure they report on the correct vehicle. We need the questions on this slide to determine if the vehicle is in scope for the survey year. Any vehicles disposed of prior to January 1, 2021 are not in scope. Those respondents will be instructed to go directly to the contact information at the end of the survey. If the respondent no longer owns a vehicle and says no to disposal prior to January 1, we ask when and how it was disposed. These respondents still have to answer questions about that vehicle. For 2021, we added a new response for how the vehicle was disposed. It now includes sent to another country. The next two sections are about acquisition and leasing. We added one new question to the acquisition section for 2021. It asked heavy trucks if they plan to upgrade to a different weight class or axle load within the next 5 years. The leasing section has been slightly revised from 2002. The first two questions are asked of all trucks and were reworded for clarity. We removed the terms lessee and lessor to avoid any confusion. There were also 3 questions for heavy trucks that ask about the characteristics of the lease. All 3 questions were on the 2002 questionnaire. Section E asks about the type of vehicle. The questions and response categories for this section are different for light and heavy trucks. For light trucks, respondents are asked to answer one question about their vehicle's body type. For heavy trucks, respondents are asked to answer 2 questions. Question 1 asks whether or not the vehicle was a semi-truck. This question was revised for 2021 based on cognitive testing. The original question from 2002 asked if the vehicle was a truck/road tractor or some other truck. Testing found that phrasing to be confusing. Question 2 is asked only if the vehicle was not a semi-truck. Several response options were removed from this list because they were trailers rather than body types. The 5 items in blue text are new or revised for 2021. They include box truck, conveyor bed, hook lift / roll-off, logging, walk-in van, and wood chipper. Section F asks a series of questions about the physical characteristics of the vehicle. We will walk through this section by different characteristics and again point out where questions differ by light or heavy truck. This series starts with questions about the number of axles and tires. For light trucks, 3 questions are asked. For 2021, we simplified the axle question series by separating out the number of tires on the rear axle from the response categories of question 1 to make a new question. For heavy trucks, 6 questions about the number of axles and their locations are asked. Again, we simplified the first question by separating the number of tire responses into its own question. The remaining questions were not changed from 2002. They ask about liftable axles, the locations on the truck, and if they are braking axles. For heavy trucks, questions are asked about the type of brakes, number of gears, and cab type. The brake type question and response categories were unchanged for 2021. We added a new question about the number of gears on the truck. On the right of this slide, you can see we revised the 2 questions about the type of cab for the truck. The first question will only be asked of semi-trucks and ask if the cab is a day or sleeper. The second question will only be asked of straight trucks. We updated the response categories to make the list more relevant to current cab types. This slide shows 3 questions asked of all trucks. Regarding the type of transmission question, response categories changed slightly for 2021. Based on feedback from cognitive testing, we simplified the response categories and added an option to write in a transmission type that is not on the list. We also added 2 new questions for this VIUS: towing capacity and the height of the truck's cabin. Again, based on comments from cognitive testing, we clarified in italicized instructions what we want measured in the cabin height question. The next several questions about truck features are asked for all trucks. In the 2002 VIUS, there was only 1 question about features on the truck, and the list was different for light and heavy trucks. The 2021 VIUS will have 9 questions and features we will point out, and we will point out any differences in items for light and heavy trucks as we go along. This first question in this series is about standard features and has some of the items that were part of the old permanent features question on the 2002 VIUS. Those are shown in the black text. 2002 VIUS only asked if the vehicle had a navigation system. Now we have 2 options for GPS, with or without navigation. Other items from the old 2002 question are recategorized in different feature lists later in this section. We also deleted items from the 2002 response categories that have become universal to most vehicles, such as air conditioning, and some that are no longer relevant, such as trip recorders. New for the 2021 VIUS are a series of questions about emerging vehicle technologies. The first question on this topic is about driving control assistance features. Each item on this list of features will be accompanied by help text that describes the feature to respondents. You can see an example of this at the bottom of the slide. The next question on emerging technologies asks about collision warning features. In 2002, collision warning system was an option in the permanent equipment list for heavy trucks only. Now we have this question for all trucks asking about specific components of a collision warning system. We should note that for all questions about features in this section, respondents are asked to mark all that apply to their truck. We have also added a new question about collision intervention features, such as automatic emergency braking and automatic emergency steering. Additionally, We will also ask about any remote or active parking assistance features on the vehicle. The last in the new series of questions on emerging technologies ask about driver assistance system features such as automated high beams and backup cameras. You can review these new questions and their associated help text on the paper forms posted on the BTS VIUS webpage. We will share that link at the end of the presentation. The next new question asks about fuel economy features. This question is asked of all trucks, but you can see the response list is different depending on if it is a light or heavy truck. All trucks are asked about different aerodynamic features, automatic shutoff and tire inflation, idle reducing technologies, and low rolling resistance tires. We also added options related to hybrid vehicle technology. Heavy trucks are asked about additional features such as fairings, nose cones, and side skirts. I'll pause now so you can review each list. Our final question in this section asks about any other features on the vehicle. Many of the items in this list were part of the old 2002 VIUS question about permanent equipment. Those are shown in black text. The slide here shows the response categories for light trucks. For the 2021 VIUS, we added partitions, shelves, racks or bins, and telematics to the list. And this slide here shows the other features for heavy trucks. You can see we added quite a few new response options for 2021. There are 12 new features for heavy trucks and are shown in blue text. I'll pause again so you can review the list. I'll now turn it back to Janine.
Thanks, Ryan. So Section G of the questionnaire. Section G asks respondents how many months of the year the vehicle was in use. For vehicles used less than a full year, a follow-up question asks for all the reasons the vehicle was not in use for a period of 90 consecutive days or more. Respondents can select multiple reasons for this. Any vehicles that reported vehicle not used, no miles driven, in the first question would not answer any of the remaining survey questions. Section H. Section H asks about the home base of the vehicle. This refers to the location where the truck was usually parked when not in use. The home base question is mostly unchanged from 2002, with the exceptions of the terminal response category, which is now terminal or motor pool, as well as the addition of the response option port. We also clarified the fleet question. This question now asks how many other vehicles were in operation, how many other vehicles were operated in addition to the survey vehicle. Section I. Section I asks a series of questions about miles driven. This slide displays the questions about annual miles and miles per gallon. For the miles per gallon question on the right, we revised the instructions to accommodate alternative fuel and electric vehicles. We specifically added more digits to the miles per gallon response to accommodate the response length for LNG, CNG, and electric vehicles. Also new for the 2021 VIUS, we added a follow-up for each of these questions, asking how the miles and miles per gallon responses were calculated by the respondent. The next two questions in Section I ask about the percentage of annual miles driven in different jurisdictions and the percentage of annual miles driven within different ranges of operation. The range of operation question is similar to what was asked in the 2002 VIUS, but was rearranged and modified slightly based upon feedback from cognitive testing. The original terminology in this question was types of trips, which our test respondents found difficult to define. So we changed it to ranges of operation. We also separated out the off-road component into a separate question to simplify what is being asked, as well as added a definition of what is meant by off-road. The last mileage question asked of all trucks is about lifetime miles driven. For the 2021 VIUS, we have added 2 new questions to the miles section for heavy trucks only. The first asks about the percentage of operating time that was spent idling. The second asks about the percentage of time that was spent using an auxiliary power unit. Section J. Section J covers fuel and maintenance topics. The first question asks about the type of fuel used by the vehicle. For the 2021 VIUS, the response categories for fuel type were modified. First, we specified alcohol fuels to include either ethanol E85 or E100. Second, we split the natural gas category into 2 separate categories, one for compressed natural gas and the other for liquefied natural gas. If a respondent's vehicle uses a fuel combination, they are instructed to mark all the fuels in that combination. The questions asking about where the vehicle is typically refueled and who performed general maintenance are unchanged from the 2002 VIUS. We asked for the typical refueling station only, but for general maintenance, we asked for all locations that apply. The question about extensive repairs was modified for the 2021 VIUS. In 2002, there was a list of examples of what might be an extensive repair as part of the question. Cognitive interviews found that respondents found the list unhelpful. The question now asks if the repairs were over $500 and now has more information, which is shown in blue, about what constitutes extensive repairs to help respondents answer the question. As we did in the past, we asked any respondent whose vehicle had extensive repairs to mark all applicable on the list of who performed those repairs. This slide displays 4 new questions for the 2021 VIUS under Section J. There are 2 new questions about the cost of general maintenance and extensive repairs on the left. Also new for the 2021 VIUS are 2 questions asking if the vehicle's engine has ever been rebuilt and when the engine was last rebuilt or overhauled. Section K looks at the vehicle configuration and starts with a series of questions about use of a trailer. These questions have been modified for the 2021 VIUS based on feedback from cognitive testing. Now respondents are asked if they use the truck to pull a trailer, and then if so, whether they pull a trailer for at least half of their miles driven. Heavy trucks only are asked which configuration they pull most often before proceeding to the questions about trailer characteristics. For those respondents who pull a trailer for at least half of their miles, the questionnaire then asks a series of questions about the characteristics of the trailer most often pulled by the vehicle. First, they're asked the number of axles on the trailer. The question shown here is for trucks that pull 1 trailer. For heavy trucks that pull double or triple trailers, the response categories increase to 8 or more axles to account for the entire configuration. Also, for heavy trucks with more than 1 trailer, the question includes axles on converter dollies. The next question asks for the length of the trailer. If the respondent pulling multiple trailers, if the respondent reported pulling multiple trailers, they are then asked the length of each trailer. For heavy trucks only, respondents are then asked the exterior width of the trailer. Again, if they reported pulling multiple trailers, they are asked the width of each trailer. This next question about trailer type is only asked of the heavy trucks that pull a trailer. We have added and revised some response categories for the 2021 VIUS, which you can see in blue on this slide. Also, this question is only asked of the trailer that is most often attached. We do not collect trailer type for all trailers in a multiple trailer configuration. Respondents for all trucks to pull trailers will be asked a new question in this VIUS about any add-on equipment on the trailer that they pull most often. Respondents can select all that apply to their trailer. Again, for heavy trucks that pull multiple trailers, we only ask this about one trailer that the one trailer that the respondent pulled most often. Once we have asked all the characteristics of the trailer, we ask for the total length of the vehicle or vehicle trailer configuration. The responses are categorical, and heavy trucks have more options to account for the longer length of their trailer configuration. For anyone who reported, no, this vehicle pulled a trailer for less than 50% of all miles driven in the very first question of this section, this question here would only reflect the length of the vehicle itself. For everyone else, it reflects the total length of the vehicle plus all trailers. Section L. Section L asks about the weight of the vehicle or vehicle trailer combination. The wording of these questions have changed since the 2002 VIUS. The use of the term payload was revised with the term cargo to ensure that respondents include all weight loaded onto their vehicle, not just the weight that results from carrying goods for sale. For all trucks, we ask the weight of the vehicle or the vehicle trailer combination without any cargo. Then we ask the average weight of the vehicle or the vehicle trailer combination when carrying a typical load. The average weight is defined as the vehicle weight plus any cargo weight. The main difference between the forms is that the light truck responses are categorical and the heavy truck responses are write-ins. Two new questions were added to Section L for heavy trucks only. The first asks about the number of annual overweight permits purchased for the truck. The second asks about the number of trips taken by the truck that require single trip overweight permits. And now for the remaining slides, I will turn it back over to Ryan.
Thank you, Janine. So the next section looks at the business use of the vehicle, I should say. For the 2021 VIUS, we add the screener question to first ask if the vehicle is used at least partially for business-related activities. This simplifies the questionnaire for respondents who own personal vehicles. If the respondent answers no, this vehicle is strictly used for personal use, the survey ends here. For those who answer yes, the survey continues on to questions about industry, operator classification, and products carried. The next question asks about industry classification for the business activity. This list is based on the North American Industry Classification System, also known as NAICS. For the 2021 VIUS, we split up some of the larger NAICS categories to help respondents correctly classify their business. For example, construction was split into residential or non-residential, and HVAC, plumbing, electrical was pulled out of construction to form its own category. Additionally, we split up agriculture, forestry, and fishing into multiple categories. The next two questions are revisions of the original 2002 VIUS question about operator classifications. For the question on the left, we ask respondents to mark all categories of commercial activities that apply. Looking at the question on the right, we then ask respondents to divide up their mileage into the corresponding categories. The response categories include personal use to capture any miles driven for non-commercial activities. The category with the highest percentage of miles determines which question the respondent goes to next. If they report the highest percentage in either of the transporting goods categories, they continue on with more business use questions. However, if they report the highest percentage In any other category, the survey ends. For heavy trucks that reported the majority of their mileage in the transporting goods belonging to another person or company category on the previous slide, they next answer questions in the for-hire section. This section has been simplified since 2002. There are now only 2 questions. The first question asks about the percentage of miles driven for truckload versus less than truckload shipments. The second question asks about the number of loads and/or runs averaged in a week. In 2002, the question asked about pickups and/or deliveries. In this next section, respondents who reported the majority of their miles in either of the transporting goods categories will answer questions about products, equipment, or materials carried. First, they report the percentage of miles driven empty and loaded. If they were to report 100% empty, the survey ends right there. Otherwise, they move on to the 2 new questions in blue text on the right side. The new questions ask about mileage driven while cubed out and while weighed out. These are asked of all trucks. Finally, the trucks that transport goods are asked to report the miles for each product they carry. The product list is not shown here, but it contains over 50 items that align with the standard classification of transported goods, also known as SCTG. 3 new questions were added to this section for the 2021 VIUS and are only asked of heavy trucks. First, we asked the percentage of miles driven to reposition a vehicle to a new location for the next load. Next, we ask about the percentage of miles driven empty or deadhead back to home base. And the last new question asked if the vehicle had to take a less efficient route due to height or weight restrictions on the bridge, tunnel, or highway. Finally, heavy trucks are asked 3 questions about hazardous materials. These questions have not changed from 2002. We asked respondents if they carried hazmat in quantities large enough to require a placard. If they say yes, then we ask them to report the percentage of miles driven for each type of hazardous material carried. The list is too long to show here, but aligns with the official hazmat classes and divisions. And that wraps up the end of the survey content for the 2021 VIUS. The last thing we ask the respondents before they leave the survey is to provide their contact information. So what happens next? Our Federal Register notice for the 2021 VIUS was posted in March. The public comment period is open through May. Right now, we are working to finalize all the question wording by the beginning of June of this year. At this point, we can only incorporate minor question or response wording changes. Unfortunately, we cannot add any new questions at this point. In February of 2022, we will mail out invitations to the sample vehicle owners. These letters will provide the login information to complete the survey online. The data collection for the 2021 VIUS ends in October of 2022. Once all the data is collected, we will begin data review and then tabulate estimates for the data products that will be released in the fall of 2023. Each of our organizations has a webpage for VIUS. The content is similar across the pages, but you can find all the up-to-minute news on the BTS VIUS webpage. The webpage contains a paper version of the questionnaire used in our pilot survey. So you're aware, some questions have changed since that version of the questionnaire was posted, so wording in these slides may not match the forms on the webpage. The BTS VIUS webpage also offers access to a monthly newsletter that you can sign up to, access to historical VIUS data dating back to 1963, and an FAQ section. This webpage will continue to be updated as the VIUS project progresses. I'll now turn it back over to Janine.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Okay, so we're now going to take a 5-minute break. During this time, if you wish to ask a question, we'll open up our lines. So the operator will put you in queue to ask a question. You can also continue to pose your questions in the chat if you haven't done so already. And at approximately 11:46, we'll re-adjourn and take your questions then.
And if you would like to get in queue for a phone question, you can press star 1 at this time. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Are there any questions on the line for the Q&A?
So far, we don't have anybody that's queued up on the phone lines. Again, as a reminder, if you'd like to, it is star 1 to do so.
Okay, and in the meantime, we did receive some questions to the chat. I'll just answer or read out and answer a few of these. These are really good questions. The first one comes from Sarah Hernandez, who asks, where are the ELD devices going to be listed? Are they considered part of the telematics system? Sarah, yes, that's correct. They will be a part of the telematics system if they are indeed part of that carrier system. We do not have a separate question for ELDs. Alicia asks what percentage of operating time is idling? Is there a question to quantify the total operating time? This is actually something we were posed from another data user recently, and something that we're looking into. We don't know if we'll be able to add that on or not, but we understand that would be helpful to understand the percentage captured better. And then we have a question on if there's going to be a mobile version of the survey or just a web version. Kelly, can you answer that? I believe it's just going to be the web browser version. Does that web browser version work on mobile?
Yes, it will work on mobile devices.
Okay, great. The next question from Stefan asks if we plan to release a microdata set. Yes, we do. And the date for that, Kelly, do I have it right? It's around December 2023?
Yes, that's what we're aiming for, is December.
All right, great. And Wolfgang, I did put the slide back to our, I'll do it once more, our URLs here. We don't have those written down yet. Again, we're going to send out all of the slides from today. So if there are any specifics from these slides, you'll have those on hand. Let's see. If there are no other questions, then we'll go ahead and conclude our webinar for today. Like I said, on our BTS webpage, we will be posting a copy of the slides from today. There will also be a transcript of the presentation as well as the Q&A. We have another question. Does the database provide model year distributions for the vehicles? So, Kelly, maybe this is a question for you, but our microdata should provide this data to create these distributions.
Yes, model year is from the data that we get to the sample. There may be some limitations to what we can show because of disclosure in the microdata. But yes, we do have the model year of the truck.
Thanks for that question, Wolfgang. And on the slide is our contact information, both for myself and Ryan and our general VIUS inbox. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We are here to answer your questions. Do check back on our webpage for everything as a result of this webinar. And again, we just really thank you for being here today and your interest in the VIUS. So that's all we have today. Take care.
Thank you. That does conclude today's call. Thank you all for participating. You may disconnect your lines at this time.